Billionaire secretly followed his pregnant maid after work. What he discovered changed everything. She pressed her hand against her swollen belly as she stepped into the cold evening air, unaware that the man who barely acknowledged her existence was about to follow her into a world that would shatter everything he thought he knew about life, love, and what truly matters. Before we go deep into today's enchanting tales, I want you to tell me in the comment section what country you are watching from, my cherished, radiant family. My heart is absolutely brimming with joy to feel you all here with me today. Welcome to Mr. Paul Stories, where we gather as one, weaving our souls together through the magic of storytelling. Before we go deeper into today's enchanting tale, I want to check in. How are you, my dear friends? Hope you're doing well, and I trust your family is doing great. I truly care about your well-being, hoping your day is filled with light and warmth. And tell me, did you find value in our last video? If it touched your heart or sparked your imagination, please drop a comment below saying, "Yes, it did." It means the world to hear from you. Now, let's hold each other close in spirit for a heartfelt prayer. May our hearts brim with endless love. May our spirits soar with hope and wonder. And may a gentle cascade of blessings wrap us in peace, joy, and strength. I pray this story binds us closer, ignites our dreams, and fills us with the beauty of shared moments. Amen. Come, my precious friends, let's get cozy, let our cares fade, and step hand in heart into this wondrous new adventure, ready for all the magic to unfold. The marble floors of the Blackwood mansion gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each surface reflecting a life built on precision, control, and emotional distance. Alexander Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard where he controlled every move. At 42, he had built an empire that stretched across continents. But tonight, something felt different, a restlessness that no amount of success could silence. His fingers drummed against the mahogany desk as he reviewed quarterly reports. But his mind kept drifting to the gentle sound of footsteps in the hallway below. For 6 months, those footsteps had become part of his daily rhythm, belonging to the quiet woman who cleaned his home with careful precision and never met his eyes directly. "Mr. Blackwood." The soft voice made him turn. Maria stood in the doorway, her uniform neat despite the long day, one hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. At 7 months pregnant, she moved with the careful grace of someone carrying precious cargo while navigating a world that seemed designed to overlook her existence. "I've finished the East Wing, sir. Will there be anything else tonight?" Alexander's gaze lingered on her face, really looked at her for perhaps the first time. Dark eyes held a weariness that spoke of struggles he couldn't fathom. Yet there was something else there, a quiet dignity that made him feel strangely small despite his towering presence in the business world. "No, that's all," he cleared, his throat surprised by the unusual gentleness in his voice. "Drive safely." Maria nodded, disappearing as quietly as she had arrived. Alexander found himself walking to the window again, watching as she emerged from the service entrance 5 minutes later. She walked slowly, carefully, toward the bus stop under the flickering streetlight. Something twisted in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that felt uncomfortably like concern. Meanwhile, Maria pulled her thin coat tighter as the October wind cut through the expensive neighborhood. The bus ride home would take an hour, followed by a 20-minute walk through streets that grew darker and less safe with each block. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about the bills piling up on her kitchen table, about the father who had disappeared the moment she'd shared her news. But she also thought about the man in the penthouse office, how his voice had softened when he'd told her to drive safely. She didn't own a car, hadn't for 3 years, but something in his tone suggested he might actually care about her well-being. The thought was both warming and heartbreaking. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Maria pressed her forehead against the cool glass and whispered a prayer for strength. She had no idea that high above, a billionaire was making a decision that would change both their lives forever. Alexander watched until the bus disappeared into the night, that strange restlessness growing stronger. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering about someone else's story, and tomorrow, he would do something completely out of character. He would follow her home. What do you think drives people from different worlds to suddenly see each other as human beings? Have you ever had a moment where you realized you knew nothing about someone you saw every day? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most profound connections begin with simple curiosity. Alexander sat in his black Mercedes, engine idling, feeling ridiculous. He'd dismissed his driver for the evening, something he never did, and now found himself parked across from the bus stop like some common stalker. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was insane, that billionaires didn't follow their domestic staff through city streets. But the restless ache in his chest had grown stronger overnight, demanding answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. When Maria emerged from the mansion's service entrance, Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She moved more slowly tonight, one hand pressed against her lower back, the other cradling her belly. Even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the way she paused to catch her breath before continuing toward the bus stop. The bus arrived 10 minutes late, belching diesel smoke into the cold air. Alexander watched Maria climb aboard, her movements careful and deliberate. Then he did something that would have shocked his business associates. He pulled into traffic and followed a city bus through the winding streets of downtown. The journey took them through neighborhoods that grew progressively more worn, where luxury gave way to necessity and hope lived in the small details. Flower boxes in apartment windows, children's chalk art on sidewalks, the warm glow of family dinners through thin curtains. Alexander had built his fortune in this city, but had never really seen it. Not like this. When Maria finally stepped off the bus, Alexander parked a block away and watched her begin the walk home. The streetlights here were sparse, some flickering, others dark entirely. She moved with the careful awareness of someone who had learned to navigate danger, keys already in her hand, pace steady despite her condition. 3 blocks from the bus. Stop! It happened. Maria stumbled, her hand flying to her belly as she gasped in pain. She leaned against a chain-link fence, breathing heavily, her face pale under the weak streetlight. Alexander's heart hammered as he watched her struggle, every instinct screaming at him to help, but uncertainty keeping him frozen in place. Then he saw them, 3 figures emerging from the shadows of an alley ahead. Even from his distance, Alexander could read the threat in their movements, the way they spread out to block Maria's path. His hands were on the door handle before conscious thought caught up with his body. "Hey, pretty mama," one of them called out, his voice carrying through the still night air. "What's a nice girl like you doing out here all alone?" Maria's voice was steady, but Alexander could hear the fear underneath. "Please, I'm just trying to get home to my family." "Family?" Another one laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "Looks like you already got yourself in trouble once. Maybe you need someone to take care of you." That's when Alexander moved. He didn't think about the consequences or the headlines if this went wrong. He didn't consider how his presence here would need explaining. He simply couldn't watch another human being, especially her, face danger alone. "Excuse me," his voice cut through the night, authoritative and calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The 3 men turned, surprised by the interruption. Alexander stepped into the circle of light, his expensive suit and confident bearing immediately shifting. The dynamic. "Is there a problem here?" Maria's eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Blackwood? What are you?" "I was just driving by," he lied smoothly, his gaze never leaving the 3 men. "Maria, I believe you missed your ride earlier. I'm here to take you home." The tension hung thick in the air. One of the men sized up Alexander, clearly calculating whether a well-dressed businessman was worth the trouble. After a moment that felt like hours, they melted back into the shadows, muttering curses but unwilling to risk whatever consequences might come from tangling with someone who clearly had resources. For several heartbeats, Alexander and Maria stood in the weak circle of streetlight, both breathing heavily. The sound of the city, distant traffic, sirens, the hum of electrical lines, filled the space between them. "You followed me," Maria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Ah, yes. What?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Alexander looked at this woman, really looked at her, and saw something that made his chest tighten. Strength wrapped in vulnerability. Dignity maintained, despite circumstances that would have broken lesser people. Beauty that had nothing to do with the superficial elegance he was used to, and everything to do with the human spirit. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty surprising them both. I watched you leave tonight, and I realized I know nothing about your life. You take care of my home, but I don't even know where you live, if you're safe, if you need." He trailed off. The weight of his own ignorance settling on his shoulders. Maria's hand moved protectively over her belly. "I didn't ask you to care. I know." Alexander stepped closer, and for the first time in months, Maria didn't look away. "But I do." The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything. In that moment, under a flickering streetlight, in a neighborhood where hope lived in small spaces, a billionaire and his pregnant maid crossed an invisible line that would alter both their lives forever. "Come on," Alexander said gently, gesturing toward his car. "Let me take you home. Please." Maria hesitated, then nodded. As they walked toward the Mercedes, neither of them spoke, but both understood that nothing would ever be the same. Have you ever had someone show up for you when you least expected it? Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we step outside our comfort zone to help another person. What do you think drives that kind of courage? Let me know in the comments below. The Mercedes purred through the quiet streets, its leather interior a stark contrast to the harsh reality they'd just left behind. Alexander gripped the steering wheel, hyper-aware of every breath Maria took in the passenger seat. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It was loaded with questions. Neither knew how to ask, and answers neither was ready to give. "Turn left at the next light," Maria said quietly, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the engine. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching familiar landmarks slide past in luxury she'd never experienced. Alexander followed her directions, each turn taking them deeper into a neighborhood where his car stood out like a beacon. Apartments rose on either side of the street, their facades telling stories of struggle and survival. Laundry hung from fire escapes, and somewhere, in the distance, a baby cried while music drifted from an open window. "Here," Maria said as they approached a four-story building with chipped paint and a flickering neon sign advertising a corner store. "You can drop me off here." But Alexander was already pulling into a parking space, his businessman's eye automatically assessing the building's condition. Broken steps, windows patched with tape, a front door that hung slightly askew. His chest tightened as he realized this was her reality, that while he slept in silk sheets, she climbed these stairs every night. "You don't have to get out," Maria said quickly, her hand already on the door handle. "Thank you for the ride. I'll see you at work tomorrow." Her tone was polite, distant, the same voice she used when cleaning his office. It was as if the moment under the streetlight had never happened, as if she was already rebuilding the walls between their worlds. "Maria, wait." Alexander turned off the engine. "I'd like to walk you to your door. Make sure you get inside safely." "That's not necessary, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice carried a new edge, something defensive and proud. "I've been getting myself home safely for months." I know you don't need it," Alexander interrupted, then caught himself. His voice softened. "I'm sorry. I'm not trying to imply that you can't take care of yourself. What I saw back there, the way you handled that situation, you're stronger than most people I know." Maria's hand stilled on the door handle. "Then why are you here?" The question cut straight to the heart of it. Alexander stared at the steering wheel, searching for words that wouldn't sound condescending or naive. "Because I realized tonight that I've been living in a bubble. I make decisions that affect thousands of people, but I don't know what their lives actually look like. I don't know what it means to wait for a bus at night or walk through streets where the lights don't work. And you think following me home gives you some kind of insight?" Maria's voice was quiet but sharp. "You think one night of slumming it makes you understand what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, to choose between groceries and prenatal vitamins?" Alexander flinched at the accuracy of her words. "No, I clean your house, Mr. Blackwood. I scrub your floors and dust your expensive art and wash your dishes. But that doesn't make us friends. It doesn't give you the right to follow me or make assumptions about my life." The words stung because they were true. Alexander felt the familiar urge to retreat behind his walls of authority and wealth, to remind her who paid her salary. But something in her voice, not anger, but hurt, kept him from taking that familiar path. "You're right," he said finally. "I have no right to be here. I have no right to follow you or assume anything about your life." But what?" Alexander looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw something that made his chest ache. Maria's defenses were up, her spine straight with pride, but he could see the exhaustion beneath the strength. The way her hand rested protectively on her belly. The shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worries that money couldn't solve. But I can't stop thinking about the fact that you're pregnant and alone, walking through dangerous neighborhoods at night. I can't stop wondering if you have everything you need, if you're getting proper medical care, if... Stop. Maria's voice was firm. Just stop. You want to know what I need? I need to provide for my baby. I need to keep my job so I can pay rent and buy food and maybe save enough for when the baby comes. I need to not be seen as a charity case by my employer. She pushed open the car door, the cool night air rushing in. I need to maintain what little dignity I have left. Alexander watched her struggle to get out of the low car, his instincts screaming at him to help while his mind processed the weight of her words. She was right. He had reduced her to an object of pity, a problem to be solved rather than a person. To be respected. Maria, he called as she reached the building's entrance. She turned back, her key already in the lock. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel like a charity case. That's not how I see you. Then how do you see me? The question hung in the air between them. Alexander sat in his luxury car, looking at this woman who cleaned his house by day and returned to struggle by night, and realized he didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Not one that explained the tightness in his chest or the way her voice had gotten under his skin. I see someone who deserves better than having to choose between groceries and prenatal vitamins. He said finally. That Maria's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. I'll see you at work tomorrow. She disappeared into the building, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of his own privilege and the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. As he drove back toward his mansion, he couldn't shake the image of Maria climbing those broken stairs, pregnant and alone, carrying burdens he was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, he told himself, things would go back to normal. Tomorrow, he would be the boss and she would be the employee, and this strange interlude would be forgotten. But deep down, he knew he was lying to himself. Something had cracked open tonight, and there was no going back to the comfortable distance they'd maintained before in her apartment. Maria leaned against the closed door, her heart still racing. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her. It's okay, little one, she whispered. We're going to be okay. But as she looked around her small apartment, at the second-hand furniture and the bills stacked on her kitchen table, she couldn't shake the memory of genuine concern in Alexander Blackwood's eyes. It terrified her more than the men in the alley had, because Karen could be taken away. And she couldn't afford to hope for something that was never meant to be hers. Pride and vulnerability often clash when we're at our lowest points. Have you ever had someone try to help you when you felt like accepting it would compromise your dignity? Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. What do you think makes it so difficult to accept help when we need it most? The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving white. Alexander sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his expensive suit wrinkled from the night's events, watching Maria sleep fitfully on the narrow bed behind the curtain. The doctor had confirmed what they'd both feared during the tense car ride. Early contractions brought on by stress and exhaustion. She needs complete bed rest for at least a week, Dr. Martinez had explained, her voice gentle but firm. The baby's fine for now, but another episode like tonight could trigger premature labor. Does she have family who can stay with her? Alexander had watched Maria's face crumple at the question, seen the way she'd turned toward the wall to hide her tears. The silence had stretched too long before she'd whispered, "There's no one." Now, 3 hours later, Maria was being discharged with strict instructions and nowhere safe to go. Her apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up in a building where the elevator had been broken for 6 months. The very stairs that had gotten her home every night for the past year had become impossible obstacles. "I can figure something out," Maria insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed, discharge papers clutched in her hands, trying to project a strength they both knew was failing. Alexander stood by the window, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. He'd been thinking all night, wrestling with a decision that went against every rational instinct he possessed. But rationality had fled somewhere. around the moment he'd seen her stumble on that dark street. "Come stay at the mansion," he said quietly, not turning around. The silence stretched so long that Alexander finally faced her. Maria was staring at him as if he'd suggested she sprout wings and fly. "Excuse me. You heard the doctor. You need bed rest and someone to watch over you. I have 14 bedrooms, most of them empty. You can stay in the guest wing, completely private, separate entrance if you want. Mrs. Chun can bring you meals, and I'll arrange for a nurse to check on you daily." Maria's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You want your pregnant maid to recover in your guest room? What will people think?" "I don't care what people think." "Yes, you do." Maria stood carefully, her movements deliberate. "You care about your reputation, your business, your image. Having the help living in your guest wing isn't exactly the kind of story that makes Fortune magazine." Alexander felt frustration rise in his chest. "This isn't about image. This is about making sure you and your baby are safe." "Why?" The question came out like a challenge. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me? You've employed dozens of people over the years. Have you ever followed any of them home? Offered them guest rooms?" The directness of her question hit him like a physical blow. Alexander found himself reaching for words that had never existed in his vocabulary. Words about connection, about seeing someone truly for the first time, about the way her quiet strength had somehow become essential to his daily peace. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But I can't watch you struggle alone anymore." Maria's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I've been alone for 7 months, Mr. Blackwood. I survived my boyfriend leaving when I told him about the baby. I survived losing my other job when I started showing. I survived eating crackers for dinner so I could save money for baby clothes. I don't need your pity." "It's not pity. Then what is it?" Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside his chest. The careful walls he'd built around his heart, the protection he'd maintained since his parents' death 15 years ago, began to crack. "I don't know," he whispered, "but I know I can't let you go back to that apartment alone." A nurse appeared at the curtain, clipboard in hand. "Miss Santos, we need to finalize your discharge plan. The doctor mentioned you'd need assistance at home." Maria's face went pale. Alexander watched her struggle, saw the exact moment when pride warred with necessity and necessity won. She began, then stopped. Her hand moved to her belly, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I guess I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Alexander said gently. "But sometimes the brave choice is accepting help." The nurse looked between them, sensing the undercurrents, but keeping her expression professional. "So you'll be staying with Mr. Blackwood during your recovery?" Maria nodded slowly, and Alexander felt something loosen in his chest. Relief so profound it was almost painful. "I'll have the guest wing prepared," he said. "And Maria? This arrangement, it's temporary, just until you're back on your feet. No obligations, no expectations, just safety and rest." But even as he said the words, Alexander knew he was lying. Nothing about this felt temporary. Looking at Maria's exhausted face, seeing the way she cradled her unborn child, he understood that she'd already become something he couldn't name and couldn't let go. The next few hours passed in a blur of arrangements. Alexander made calls from the hospital corridor, his voice crisp and authoritative as he organized a full medical setup in the guest wing, arranged for grocery deliveries, and cleared his own schedule for the next week. At BY noon, they were driving through the gates of the Blackwood mansion, but this time Maria wasn't arriving as the help. She was arriving as a guest, and the shift in dynamic felt seismic. "The blue room overlooks the garden," Alexander explained as they walked through the marble foyer. "It gets morning light, and it's completely private. Mrs. Chin will bring you whatever you need." Maria moved slowly, taking in the opulence around her with new eyes. "I've cleaned these rooms 100 times, but I've never really seen them." "What do you mean?" She paused at the base of the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the mahogany banister. "When you're working, you don't look at beauty the same way. You look for dust, for things out of place. You don't see the way the light comes through those windows, or how the flowers in that vase probably cost more than I make in a month." Alexander felt something twist in his stomach. "Maria, I don't apologize," she said quickly. "I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty. I'm just trying to understand how we ended up here." They climbed the stairs together, slowly, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the guest wing, Alexander opened the door to reveal a room that looked like something from a luxury hotel. King-size bed with pristine white linens, sitting area by the window, private bathroom with a soaking tub. Maria stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. "I can't accept this." "You already have," Alexander said gently. "The question now is whether you'll let yourself rest." For the first time since the hospital, Maria smiled. A real smile that transformed her entire face. "You're very stubborn, aren't you? It's gotten me where I am." "And where exactly is that?" she asked, settling carefully into the chair by the window. Alexander looked around the opulent room, then at Maria bathed in afternoon sunlight, and realized he had no idea how to answer that question anymore. The morning light filtered through the hospital room's thin curtains, casting everything in a soft, vulnerable glow. Maria had been stable for 2 days now. The contractions subsided, the baby safe for the moment. But Alexander hadn't left her side, much to the confusion of the nursing staff and Maria's own bewilderment. "You should go home," Maria said quietly, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Your business empire won't run itself." Alexander looked up from the chair he'd pulled close to her bed, his usually pristine appearance rumpled from sleeping in hospital furniture. "My assistant can handle things for a few days. Besides, someone needs to make sure you're actually resting instead of trying to clean the hospital room." A small smile tugged at Maria's lips, the first genuine one he'd seen from her. "I wasn't going to clean it. You were eyeing that water pitcher like it was out of place." Their shared laugh was interrupted by a soft knock. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, peered around the doorframe. She had Maria's dark eyes and the same careful way of holding herself, as if she'd learned early that the world required caution. "Mama." The girl's voice was small, uncertain that Maria's entire demeanor transformed, warmth flooding her features. "Isabella, mi amor. Come here." The girl approached slowly, her gaze flicking nervously between Maria and Alexander. She wore a school uniform that had seen better days, but it was clean and pressed with the kind of care that spoke of love despite limited resources. "Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brought me," Isabella said, settling carefully on the edge of the bed. "She said you were sick." "I'm okay, Mija. Just tired. The baby wanted to come early, but the doctors said we need to wait a little longer." Alexander watched the interaction with growing understanding. This wasn't just about Maria, there was already a child depending on her, a little girl who looked at her mother with the kind of devoted trust that made his chest ache. "Isabella," Maria said gently, "this is Mr. Blackwood. He helped Mama when she wasn't feeling well." The girl studied Alexander with the serious expression of a child who'd learned to read adults for signs of danger or kindness. After a moment, she offered a shy smile. "Thank you for helping my mama." "It was my pleasure," Alexander replied, his voice gentler than Maria had ever heard it. "How old are you, Isabella?" 8. "I'm in 3rd grade. I can read chapter books now." Pride lit up her small face. "That's wonderful. What's your favorite book?" "The one about the girl who finds the secret garden. Mama reads it to me when she's not too tired from work." Alexander's heart clenched. He could picture it. Maria, exhausted from cleaning his mansion, still finding the energy to read to her daughter in whatever small space they called home. "I love that book too," he said. "Have you read any of the other books by that author?" Isabella shook her head, and Alexander made a mental note. Books. He could do books. As the afternoon wore on, Isabella curled up next to Maria, both of them dozing in the narrow hospital bed. Alexander found himself playing silent guardian, turning away well-meaning nurses who wanted to enforce visiting hours and fielding calls from his office with quiet efficiency. It was during one of these quiet moments that Maria's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, and Alexander saw her face go pale. "What is it?" he asked. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she set the phone aside. "Nothing. Just nothing." But Alexander had seen enough fear in his business dealings to recognize it. "Maria, what's wrong?" She looked at Isabella, still sleeping peacefully against her side, and something in her expression broke Alexander's heart. "It's Diego," she whispered. "Isabella's father. He's been in prison for the past 2 years. Drug charges. He gets out next month." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Alexander felt pieces of Maria's story clicking into place. Her wariness, her fierce independence, her fear of accepting help. He doesn't know about the baby, Maria continued, her voice barely audible. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified it was his. But the timing, it has to be from after he was arrested. She trailed off. Unable to finish, Alexander's jaw tightened. Someone hurt you. Maria's silence was answer enough. I never reported it, she whispered. I couldn't. I was undocumented then, scared of losing Isabella. I survived it. And when I found out about the baby, I tried to see it as a gift, not a reminder. The weight of her words settled over Alexander like a heavy blanket. This incredible, strong woman, had endured more than he could fathom, and she'd done it alone, protecting her daughter, building a life from nothing. The text, he asked gently. Someone told Diego I'm pregnant. He's claiming the baby is his. He says when he gets out, he's coming for his family. Maria's voice cracked. I can't let him near Isabella. I can't let him know where we live. But I don't know how to disappear again. I don't have the money, the resources. Alexander felt something shift inside him. A fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with the woman sitting in front of him. Maria wasn't just someone who cleaned his house. She was someone who had faced hell and kept going. Someone who read chapter books to her daughter despite bone-deep exhaustion. Someone who deserved so much more than the hand life had dealt her. You won't have to disappear, he said quietly. And you won't have to face this alone. Maria looked at him with eyes that had learned not to trust promises. You don't understand. People like Diego, they don't care about money or lawyers. They care about control, about owning people. Then it's a good thing I don't just have money and lawyers, Alexander replied, his voice carrying the steel that had built his empire. I have resources he can't imagine. And I have something he'll never have. What's that? I have something worth protecting. Maria's breath caught, and for a moment, the hospital room fell silent except for the soft sound of Isabella's breathing. In that silence, something fundamental shifted between them, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude or kindness. What? Maria whispered. Why would you do this for us? Alexander looked at her, then at the sleeping child in her arms, and felt the last of his emotional walls crumble. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my employee. You became. He paused, searching for words that felt true. You became the reason I want to be better than I am. Sometimes the people who seem strongest are carrying the heaviest burdens. When someone finally trusts you with their story, it changes everything. How do you think it feels to realize you've been seeing only a small part of someone's life? Share your thoughts below. We all have hidden chapters that shape who we are. The community center buzzed with gentle activity as Maria led Alexander through the main hall. Children's laughter echoed from the after-school program, mixing with the soft murmur of adults in the job training classroom. Alexander had never been in a place like this, where hope lived and donated furniture and dreams were built with volunteer hours and determination. This is where I spend most of my free time, Maria said, her voice carrying a pride that made Alexander's chest tighten. When I'm not working, I help coordinate the childcare program and teach basic computer skills to parents looking for better jobs. Alexander watched her interact with the children who ran up to greet her, their faces lighting up as they showed her drawings and shared stories about their day. She knew each name, remembered details about their lives, celebrated their small victories with the same enthusiasm others reserved for major accomplishments. Miss Maria, a little girl with pigtails tugged on her uniform. Look what I drew. She held up a crayon picture of a family standing in front of a house with a crooked chimney and flowers that were taller than the people. That's beautiful, Sophia, Maria said, kneeling carefully to examine the artwork. Tell me about your family. That's my mama and my little brother, and that's my papa who's coming home soon from his job far away. Sophia's voice carried the absolute faith of childhood. He's going to buy us a real house with a garden just like this one. Alexander felt something crack open in his chest as he watched Maria's face, the way she held Sophia's dreams as if they were made of spun glass, precious and fragile and worth protecting. I believe he will, Maria said softly. And when he does, you'll have to show me that garden. After Sophia skipped away to join the other children, Maria turned to Alexander. expecting to see the polite discomfort that wealthy people usually wore in places like this. Instead, she found him staring at the wall of photographs, dozens of families, graduation ceremonies, job placements, small victories that represented enormous personal triumphs. "How long have you been coming here?" Alexander asked, his voice unusually quiet. "3 years. Ever since I moved to the city." Maria settled into one of the worn but comfortable chairs, her hand resting on her belly. "When I first arrived, I had nothing. No family, no friends, no idea how to survive here. Mrs. Chun, she runs this place. She didn't just give me a safe place to stay. She gave me a community." "What about the baby's father?" Alexander asked gently, then immediately regretted the intrusion. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." Maria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on her stomach. "David was charming. He had big dreams, bigger promises. He said he loved me, that we'd build a life together." She looked up at Alexander, her eyes clear and honest. "When I told him about the baby, he said he wasn't ready to be tied down. That was 4 months ago. I'm sorry. Don't be." Maria's voice held a strength that surprised them both. "I used to think love meant finding someone who would rescue me from my problems. Now I think maybe love is finding someone who believes you're strong enough to handle whatever comes your way." Alexander felt those words settle somewhere deep in his chest. "Is that what you're doing? Handling whatever comes your way?" "Every day." Maria smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached her eyes. "Some days are harder than others, but I've learned that being alone doesn't mean being abandoned. Sometimes it means being free to discover who you really are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play and the adults work toward their goals. Alexander found himself thinking about his own life, the beautiful emptiness of his mansion, the relationships built on transactions rather than trust, the success that had somehow left him feeling hollow. "Can I ask you something?" Maria said suddenly. "Of course. Why do you work so hard? I mean, you have more money than most people see in a lifetime. You could do anything, go anywhere. But you're always in that office, always on the phone, always busy." Alexander considered the question seriously. "I suppose because it's what I know how to do. Building companies, making deals, acquiring assets. It's like a game I'm good at playing. But do you enjoy it?" The question hung between them, like a challenge. Alexander realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something simply because it brought him joy. "When I was a kid," he said slowly, "I used to build things. Not companies or portfolios, but actual things. Tree houses, model airplanes. Elaborate structures with building blocks. I'd spend hours creating something just to see if I could make it work. What happened to that boy? He grew up, I suppose. Learned that dreams don't pay bills or earn respect." Alexander paused, then added quietly, "Maybe he got lost somewhere along the way." Maria reached over and placed her hand on his arm, a simple gesture that somehow carried more intimacy than any of his previous relationships. "Maybe he's not lost. Maybe he's just been waiting for the right moment to come back." At that moment, Mrs. Chin approached with a tray of tea and homemade cookies. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize kindness when she encountered it. "Maria, dear, who is your friend?" "Mrs. Chun, this is Alexander." "Alexander, this is Mrs. Chun, the woman who saved my life." Mrs. Chin studied Alexander with the shrewd gaze of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. "Any friend of Maria's is welcome here. Would you like to stay for dinner? We're having a potluck tonight." Alexander looked around the room, at the mismatched furniture, the handmade decorations, the faces of people who had found family in unexpected places. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. "I'd like that very much." As the evening progressed, Alexander found himself drawn into conversations about dreams deferred and goals achieved, about the small victories that made ordinary days extraordinary. He helped serve food, listened to stories, and played simple games with children who didn't care about his net worth or his business empire. And through it all, he was acutely aware of Maria beside him. The way she moved through this community like someone who had found her place in the world. The way she included him naturally in conversations. The way she seemed to glow with a contentment he'd never experienced despite all his success. Later, as they sat on the center's front steps watching the sunset, Maria turned to him with a question. That would change everything. Alexander, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? He thought about it seriously, letting the question settle in his mind. I think I'd build something that mattered. Not just to me, but to people like the ones we met tonight. Something that created the kind of community I saw in there. Then why don't you? Because I might fail. Maria smiled, her hand moving to her belly where their future, though neither knew it yet, was growing strong. Maybe failing at something that matters is better than succeeding at something that doesn't. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of a different kind of life. A life where success was measured not in dollars, but in the light that came into people's eyes when they felt truly seen and valued. A life where love wasn't a transaction, but a gift freely given. What do you think makes someone truly wealthy? Is it the money in their bank account? Or is it the richness of their relationships and the impact they have on others? Have you ever found unexpected joy in simple moments? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones we almost overlook. The morning light streaming through Alexander's penthouse windows felt harsh and unforgiving as he paced behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear. The conversation he'd been dreading had finally come, delivered by his head of security with the efficiency of a surgical blade. Sir, about the investigation you requested on Maria Santos. The voice was clinical, professional, devastating. We've uncovered some concerning information. Alexander's stomach dropped. What kind of information? Financial records show she's been receiving payments from a Marcus Delacroix, the same Marcus Delacroix who's been trying to acquire your biotech subsidiary. The payments started 2 weeks before she was hired. The world tilted. Alexander gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you may have been compromised, sir. The pregnancy, the vulnerability, the perfect timing. It's textbook corporate espionage wrapped in a compelling personal story. The line went dead, leaving Alexander alone with the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Everything crashed down at once. The late-night conversations, the way she'd seemed to understand him so completely, the trust he'd built. Had it all been a lie? 20 minutes later, Maria arrived for work, her face glowing with the happiness that had become her constant companion over the past weeks. She hummed softly as she moved through the mansion, one hand resting on her now 8-month belly, the other carrying the cleaning supplies she barely needed anymore since Alexander had been finding excuses to spend time with her instead of leaving her to work alone. Good morning, she called out as she entered his office, her smile bright and genuine. How did your morning meeting go? Alexander stood with his back to her, staring out at the city skyline. When he turned, Maria's smile faltered at the ice in his eyes, a coldness she hadn't seen since those first weeks of working for him. We need to talk. The words hit her like a physical blow. Maria set down her supplies, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Alexander, what's wrong? You look, how long have you been working for Marcus Delacroix? The question hung in the air like a poison. Maria's face went pale, then flushed with confusion and hurt. What are you talking about? I don't know who that is. Don't lie to me. Alexander's voice was sharp, cutting. The payments, Maria. $2,500 a month, deposited into your account since 2 weeks before you started working. Here. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Maria's legs gave out slightly, and she gripped the back of a chair for support. I don't understand what you're saying. The corporate espionage, the perfectly timed pregnancy, the way you wormed your way into my life. Each word was a dagger. How much did he pay you? How much was I worth? Stop. Maria's voice cracked. Just stop. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of Marcus whoever. The only money I receive is my salary from you, and she stopped, her eyes widening as something clicked. Wait, you mean the child support payments? Child support. Alexander's certainty wavered for just a moment. The father of my baby, his name is Mark Delacroix. He sends money every month because I threatened to take him to court. Tears were streaming down her face now. But his real name, his full name. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, scrolling through old messages. Marcus Delacroix. But he's not some businessman. He's a construction foreman who got scared when I told him I was pregnant. Alexander stared at her, his mind racing. The same name, the same person, but not corporate espionage, Just a coincidence that had been twisted into something sinister by his own paranoia and his security team's overzealous investigation. You investigated me, Maria said, her voice hollow with betrayal. You made me trust you, made me believe you cared about me, and then you investigated me like I was a criminal. Maria, I know. She held up her hand, her whole body trembling. You want to know the truth? The real truth? I fell in love with you. Completely, stupidly, impossibly in love with you. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone like me could matter to someone like you. But I was wrong, wasn't I? I was always just the help. Just someone to be suspicious of. Alexander felt his world crumbling. That's not true. I love you too. I was just protecting yourself. Maria laughed bitterly. From what? From me? From a pregnant maid who works 3 jobs to pay rent on a studio apartment? What exactly did you think I was going to steal from? You, Alexander? Your money? Your secrets? Your heart? The last word hit him like a physical blow because it was true. She had stolen his heart, completely and irreversibly, and his fear of that vulnerability had led him to destroy the most real thing in his life. I trusted you, Maria continued, her voice breaking. I told you about my childhood, my dreams, my fears. I let you into my world, into my heart. And you repaid that trust by having me investigated like a common criminal. I was protecting us both, Alexander said desperately. My business, my reputation, your reputation? Maria's eyes flashed with anger through her tears. Is that what this was about? You were slumming it with the help, and when reality hit, you needed to make sure I wasn't going to embarrass you. That's not. Get out of my way. Maria moved toward the door, her dignity intact despite her tears. I quit. I'll send someone for my things. Maria, please. Let me explain. She turned back one final time, her hand on the doorknob. You want to know what the real tragedy is, Alexander? It's not that you're rich and I'm poor. It's not that we come from different worlds. It's that you had something real, something beautiful, and you threw it away because you were too afraid to believe it could be true. The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the suddenly empty office. Alexander stood frozen, surrounded by the trappings of his success, more alone than he'd ever been in his life. Outside, Maria made it to the bus stop before she collapsed onto the bench, her sobs echoing through the morning air. The baby kicked strongly, as if sensing her distress, and she placed both hands on her belly. It's okay, little one, she whispered through her tears. It's just us now. It's always been just us. But even as she said the words, her heart was breaking for the man she'd left behind, the man who had shown her what love could feel like, only to prove that fairy tales don't come true for girls like her. Have you ever let fear destroy something beautiful in your life? Sometimes our own insecurities and need to protect ourselves can become our greatest enemy. What do you think it takes to choose love over fear? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the biggest battles we fight are with ourselves. Alexander sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights blurring through tears he refused to acknowledge. 3 days had passed since Maria walked out of his life, and the silence in the mansion felt suffocating. He'd tried to return to his old routines, board meetings, conference calls, the endless pursuit of more, but everything felt hollow, mechanical, like playing a role he'd outgrown. The DNA test results lay unopened on his desk, delivered that morning by courier. He knew what they would say, but the confirmation felt irrelevant now. Whether Emma was his biological daughter or not, she had become his heart. And Maria? Maria had become his home. But he'd destroyed it all with his need for control, his inability to simply trust in the love that had grown between them. His phone buzzed with another call from his attorney, another urgent matter requiring his attention. Alexander let it go to voicemail, just as he had with the previous dozen calls. Nothing in his empire seemed to matter anymore. Meanwhile, across the city, Maria sat in her small apartment, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. Mrs. Chun had insisted on bringing dinner again, her motherly concern evident in every gesture. The older woman had become a lifeline these past few days, helping with Emma while Maria tried to piece her heart back together. You're not eating, Mrs. Chin observed, settling into the chair beside Maria's bed. That man may have hurt you, but you still need to take care of yourself. Maria's throat tightened. I thought he was different. I thought he saw me as more than just someone he could fix. Maybe he did. Maybe he still does. Mrs. Chin's weathered hand covered Maria's. Fear makes people do foolish things, especially when they've never learned how to love properly. He had me investigated like I was a criminal. He couldn't just trust me enough to ask. No, he couldn't. And that was wrong. Mrs. Chin paused, choosing her words carefully. But I've seen how he looks at you, child. How he looks at Emma. That's not the look of a man playing games. That's the look of a man who's found something precious and doesn't know how to hold it without breaking it. Maria closed her eyes, remembering the tenderness in Alexander's voice when he'd sung to Emma, the way his entire demeanor softened whenever he was with them. But then she remembered the folder, the invasion of privacy, the assumption that she was hiding something sinister. I don't know if I can trust him again, she whispered. Trust isn't about knowing someone won't hurt you, Mrs. Chin said gently. It's about knowing they'll do everything they can to make it right when they do. Back at the mansion, Alexander finally opened the DNA test results. The words swam before his eyes. Probability of paternity, 99.7%. Emma was his daughter. The daughter he'd never known he had. Born from a relationship he'd been too proud to pursue, too afraid to make real. His hands shook as he set the paper down. He'd spent 3 days wallowing in self-pity. 3 days that Emma had been in the world without her father. 3 days that Maria had been carrying this burden alone. That he thought about the conversation with his investigator, how the man had looked at him with something approaching disgust when Alexander had asked him to dig deeper into Maria's background. Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you've got a good woman there. Don't let suspicion destroy what's real. Alexander stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, the city hummed with life. People going home to families, to love, to the messy, complicated beauty of human connection. He built his fortune by calculating risks, by controlling variables, by trusting no one completely. But love wasn't a business transaction. It was a leap of faith. His phone rang again. This time it was his assistant. Mr. Blackwood, I have the mayor's office online too, and the Tokyo merger needs your approval by. Cancel everything, Alexander said quietly. Sir, cancel everything. All meetings, all calls. I need to go see my daughter. There was a pause. Your daughter, sir? Yes. Alexander's voice grew stronger. My daughter. An hour later, Alexander stood outside Maria's apartment building, his heart hammering against his ribs. He carried a single white rose, not an expensive arrangement, just one perfect flower from the garden Maria had once admired. In his other hand, he held a letter he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. The stairs seemed endless. Each step felt like a choice. Pride or humility, control or surrender, fear or love. By the time he reached Maria's door, his hands were shaking that he knocked softly, not wanting to wake Emma. The door opened, and Maria stood there in a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes red-rimmed but still beautiful. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. I know you don't want to see me, Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to know something. Maria's hand tightened on the doorframe. Alexander, she's mine, he said, the words tumbling out. Emma, she's mine. The test confirmed it. But that's not why I'm here. Maria's breath caught. Then why? Alexander held out the rose, his eyes never leaving hers. Because I love you. Not because you're the mother of my child. Not because I think I can fix your problems, or because you need rescuing. I love you because you're brave and kind, and you make me want to be better than I am. I love you because when I'm with you, I'm not just a billionaire or a business mogul. I'm just a man who's found his home. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks. You had me investigated. You couldn't just trust me. You're right. I was scared of being vulnerable, scared of being hurt again. I've spent so long protecting myself that I forgot how to simply believe in someone. Alexander took a shaky breath. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. From inside the apartment came the soft sound of Emma fussing. Maria glanced back, then looked at Alexander again. She's hungry, Maria said softly. She's been asking for you. Alexander's knees nearly buckled. She has. She keeps looking at the door, like she's waiting for someone. I think she misses her daddy. The word hit Alexander like a physical blow. Maria, please, give me another chance. Let me prove that I can be the man you both deserve. Maria stood in the doorway, her heart warring with her head. Behind her, Emma's cries grew more insistent. In front of her stood the man who had shown her what love could be, who had also shown her how deeply love could wound. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," Alexander admitted. "But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of being hurt. Please, Maria. Please." Maria looked at this powerful man standing vulnerable in her hallway, offering her his heart with shaking hands. She thought about Mrs. Chen's words, about the difference between safety and love, about the choice between protecting herself and choosing to believe in something bigger. From the apartment, Emma's cries grew louder and Alexander's eyes moved toward the sound with such longing that Maria's last defenses crumbled. "She needs her father," Maria said, stepping back to let him in. "We both do." Alexander crossed the threshold, and as the door closed behind him, both of them knew they were choosing love over fear, trust over safety, hope over the certainty of loneliness. The choice was made. Now came the beautiful, terrifying work of building a life together. What's harder, asking for forgiveness or learning to trust again? Both Maria and Alexander had to choose between protecting their hearts and opening themselves to love. Have you ever had to make that choice? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the biggest risk leads to the greatest reward. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of a house that had become a home in ways Alexander never thought possible. The sound of baby Sophia's gentle cooing mixed with Maria's soft humming as she prepared breakfast in the kitchen they now shared. Alexander stood in the doorway, still marveling at how completely his life had transformed. The mansion across town sat empty now, a monument to a life he'd outgrown. This modest house in Maria's neighborhood had become his sanctuary, a place where love lived in the small moments, where his worth wasn't measured by his bank account, but by the gentle way he could soothe a crying baby at 3 in the morning. "Good morning, my love," Maria said, turning from the stove to smile at him. The radiance in her face still took his breath away. 3 months of marriage had only deepened the connection that had begun under that flickering streetlight. Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Good morning, beautiful. How are my girls today?" "Your girls are perfect," Maria laughed, leaning back against his chest. "Sophia kept asking for Papa all night. I think she's getting spoiled by all your attention." "Impossible," Alexander murmured, pressing a kiss to Maria's temple. "A man should spoil the people he loves." The doorbell rang, and Alexander frowned. "Expecting someone?" Maria's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Actually, yes. I hope you don't mind, but I invited a few people over for brunch. People who've been wanting to meet the man who stole my heart." Alexander felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. Over the past months, he'd slowly been introduced to Maria's world, her neighbors, her friends from the community center, the tight-knit group of women who had supported her through pregnancy. Each introduction had humbled him, showing him what real wealth looked like. Relationships built on mutual care and genuine love. The door opened to reveal Isabella, Maria's closest friend, carrying a covered dish and grinning widely. Behind her came Mrs. Chun from 2 houses down, then Carlos and his wife Rosa, and finally, to Alexander's surprise, his own sister Rebecca, whom he'd recently reconnected with after years of estrangement. "Alexander." Isabella embraced him warmly. "Look at you, looking so relaxed and happy. Fatherhood suits you." "It does," he agreed, surprised by how naturally the role had come to him. When Sophia had been born, a month early, with Alexander holding Maria's hand through 18 hours of labor, he'd felt a love so profound it had changed him at a cellular level. The house, filled with laughter and conversation, Alexander found himself in the living room, holding Sophia while she slept peacefully in his arms. The baby had Maria's dark hair and his own stubborn chin, but her spirit was entirely her own, curious, gentle, and utterly trusting. "She's beautiful," Rebecca said, settling beside him on the couch. "I never thought I'd see the day when my workaholic brother would be content to sit still and hold a baby." "Neither did I," Alexander admitted. "But everything changed when I met Maria. She taught me what really matters." "What's that?" Alexander looked around the room, at Maria laughing with her friends, at the photos covering the walls showing their journey from that first tentative dinner to their wedding day, at the home they'd built together filled with people who cared about more than his net worth. "Connection," he said simply. Real, honest connection. I spent years building walls, thinking money could buy me everything I needed. But all it bought me was isolation. Maria showed me that love isn't something you can purchase. It's something you have to be brave enough to give and receive. Rebecca smiled. She's good for you. I haven't seen you this happy since we were kids. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, Alexander said, watching Sophia's peaceful face. Following Maria home that night was the first impulsive thing I'd done in decades. It was also the best decision I've ever made. Papa. Sophia's eyes fluttered open, and she gazed up at him with that trusting expression that never failed to melt his heart. I'm here, little one, he whispered, and she settled back into sleep with a contented sigh. Later, as the guests prepared to leave, Isabella pulled Alexander aside. You know, when Maria first told us about you, we were worried. A rich man pursuing a pregnant woman, it raised red flags. Alexander nodded, understanding completely. I would have been worried too. But then we met you, and we saw how you looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. And we saw how you changed, not just trying to fit into her world, but actually becoming part of it. That's when we knew your love was real. It is real, Alexander said firmly. More real than anything I've ever felt. As the afternoon wound down, Alexander found himself standing in the same spot where he'd first watched Maria from his mansion window. But now, instead of looking down at the world from his tower, he was part of it. He was home. Maria appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about that night, he said, squeezing her fingers. When I followed you home. You mean when you stalked me? Maria teased, but her eyes were warm. When I finally started living, Alexander corrected. I thought I was following you to understand your world. But really, I was following you to find my own. Maria turned to face him, her free hand touching his cheek. Do you ever regret it? Giving up that life? Alexander looked around their home, modest but filled with love, ordinary but extraordinary in all the ways that mattered. Then he looked at the woman who had shown him what wealth really meant. Never, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I didn't give up anything. I gained everything. As they stood together in the golden afternoon light, baby Sophia, sleeping peacefully in the next room, Alexander understood that true riches couldn't be counted in dollars or measured in possessions. They lived in moments like this, quiet, simple, and infinitely precious. The billionaire who had once owned everything but felt nothing had become a man who had found everything that mattered. And it all began with the courage to follow love. Even when he didn't understand where it would lead. In the end, it had led him home. Love has a way of transforming us in ways we never expect. Alexander's journey from isolation to connection shows us that sometimes the biggest risk, opening our hearts, brings the greatest reward. What's one way love has transformed your life? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else to take that leap of faith.